Greetings to all of you from St. Paul's Catholic Church here in Nampa. I sure miss being with all of you in person, and I know many of you do as well. So let's keep one another in prayer as we enter these most holy and sacred days of our church year. There is so much that one could think about and talk about when we look at the Passion of the Lord. I'd like to think about and talk about one little scene in the Passion. And it's the scene of the trial of Jesus and the accusations made to St. Peter. St. Matthew gives us these two scenes back to back. Jesus on trial with Caiaphas, and then Peter on trial in the courtyard. And they're meant to go together to show us really the difference between Jesus and Peter and what Peter is meant to be someday. Let me give you an example. Jesus is in the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. He's the most powerful religious leader in Israel. And you can imagine that surrounding Caiaphas are many other priests, Pharisees, scribes, and also the military, the guards of the Sanhedrin. So in other words, Jesus is facing this great military force. In other words, he is before all of the authority of Israel. Imagine the intimidation, imagine the fear that comes from that. And they are trying Jesus with questions, many of them false accusations. And before that, Jesus doesn't cower. He stands strong. And then he's asked under oath to be put under oath by Caiaphas. I adjure you, by the living God. It's a sacred oath. Are you the Messiah? And he says that he is. Immediately in the Passion, we move to Peter. So Jesus admits he's the Christ, and then he's going to be condemned. And we move to Peter in the courtyard. And it says a maidservant comes to him. Can you think of anyone less powerful in Israel at that time? I mean, no offense to the women among us, but in those days, women had very little voice, let alone a maidservant. There's no military around Peter, and this little powerless girl comes to Peter and says, aren't you one of his disciples? And Peter just completely flips out and denies it. There's no pressure on Peter, just completely denies it. And then another girl comes up to him. Do you see how this is the opposite of Jesus? Another girl comes up to him. You are one of his disciples. And then he says, the scripture says, then Peter makes an oath and denies it. Caiaphas puts Jesus under an oath, and he fulfills it. Peter makes his own oath to curse and deny. Why do I bring this up? Because there's a lot of Peter in me. A lot of this unconverted Peter. Peter will later go on to become one of the greatest saints in the church. I am in no way speaking against Peter, but this did happen in his life. He did have to struggle in his faith. And there are times in my life where I struggle to stand up for what is the truth. To stand up and to say, yes, I know Jesus. I'm one of his members. I belong to his group. We are entering into Holy Week, our most sacred and holy time of the year. Let's enter into this week in a profound way. Many of us will probably live the most unique Holy Week we ever have, isn't it? For many of us, all of the excuses are gone to not participate in and enter into Holy Thursday and Good Friday. I mean, we have lots of doctors and nurses and others who are working very hard, but many of us have found ourselves freed up in many ways this week. Let's enter in. Let's enter in this week. And I wanted to leave us with a simple thought of renewal in our life. In baptism, we make a solemn promise, and we renew it every year. And there are questions that are asked to us in these promises. Question 1, do you reject sin so as to live in the freedom of God's children? Do you reject the lure and temptation of sin? 3, do you reject Satan, father of sin and prince of darkness? And then we renew our faith. I want to sit with these 3 questions and honestly ask myself, how am I doing with my own battle with sin and weakness? Because that's why Jesus came. That's why he died, was that we could be freed from our sinfulness. That's why he came fundamentally. So how are you doing with your own baptism? That's what this week is about. It's about entering into the new life of the risen Lord through baptism and the sacraments, and to have that renewed. And as I think of Peter, I think of myself. Let's take some time this week to really enter in, not to, oh, I'm so bad. It's to say, I want to be more like Jesus, and I need to overcome these things in my life that are keeping me from being a saint. There's nothing wrong with addressing that. We have an opportunity to enter into a holy week here, to be a saint. And we will only be a saint when we really live those 3 questions fully, by rejecting sin and fully embracing Jesus, the risen Lord, in holiness and in faith. God bless all of you this week. Let us keep one another in prayer. Let's live this week deeply and profoundly. God bless you. It's Holy Week. Let's enter in.